The sun dipped low over Maplewood Lane, spilling gold across the tree-lined street like a final bow on a perfect autumn day. The air carried the smoky sweetness of burning leaves, mixing with the sound of children's laughter and the occasional clang of a grill being closed. It was the kind of evening that made you feel like the world, at least this small suburban corner of it, was in perfect balance. From my front porch, hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, I watched my daughter Emma, just 5 years old, pedaling her red tricycle in circles across our driveway. Her curls shimmered in the fading sunlight, bouncing with every determined push of her tiny legs. She wore her favorite dress, the purple one with rainbow stripes that she insisted on wearing nearly every day, and her face glowed with unfiltered joy. I remember thinking, in that exact moment, how lucky we were. The quiet, the safety, the simple delight of watching your child ride in circles while the world turned slowly behind them. It felt like nothing could touch us here, in this picture-perfect cul-de-sac. I had no idea that peace was about to shatter. And it would begin with a voice, sharp, angry, and all too familiar. That voice belonged to Karen Mitchell, the iron-fisted president of our HOA and self-appointed guardian of Maplewood Lane's prestige. She didn't just enforce the rules. She lived for them. To Karen, a weed in the wrong place was a personal affront. A garden gnome? Blasphemy. And don't even think about leaving a kid's bike in view from the sidewalk. In the 3 years since she'd been elected, Karen had transformed our peaceful little neighborhood into her personal dictatorship. She patrolled the sidewalks like a prison warden, clipboard in hand, documenting every perceived violation. She was the kind of person who could quote HOA bylaws from memory. And she did. Often. Loudly. We'd all gotten letters, warnings, fines, threats of legal action. Mine? 3 in 1 month. Each one about Emma's tricycle, cluttering the driveway, as if it were a junked-out car leaking oil onto the asphalt. The last notice warned of escalated action if the situation wasn't resolved. I didn't. Take it seriously. It was a tricycle. Emma was 5. She deserved to ride and play without fear of red tape and angry neighbors. I figured at worst, we'd end up in another pointless meeting where Karen would lecture us about aesthetic integrity and property values. What none of us realized was that Karen's obsession had evolved, mutated into something dangerous, something unstable. Her rules weren't just guidelines anymore. They were gospel. And anyone who broke them, even slightly, was an enemy in her eyes. We had laughed about her behind closed doors, mocked her ridiculous memos and power-hungry antics. But looking back, there were signs. Stories from other neighbors about her threats, her fixation on control, her endless talk about what happens when people stop listening. That day, Karen didn't bring a letter. She brought a loaded gun. I heard her before I saw her, heels clacking against the pavement like gunshots, her voice slicing through the calm of the evening. "Tom, I told you, get that thing off the driveway." I looked up, confused for a split second, until I saw her barreling across the street. Karen Mitchell, storming over like a hurricane in khakis. Her face was flushed crimson, jaw clenched tight, eyes locked on Emma's tricycle like it had personally. Insulted her ancestors. Emma froze mid-pedal, her smile vanishing. She looked over at me, uncertain. I set down my coffee and stepped off the porch, instinctively moving toward her. "It's just a tricycle, Karen," I said, trying to stay calm. "She's playing. It's not hurting anyone." "Not hurting anyone?" Karen's voice shot up an octave, nearly shrill. "It's an eyesore. This neighborhood has standards, and you are dragging them down." She was in our driveway now, uninvited, unwelcome. Her fingers stabbed at the air like a weapon, veins pulsing in her neck, eyes wild. Emma backed away on her trike, confused and scared. I could feel her little body trembling as I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "She's 5, I said, voice low, tightening with controlled anger. "This isn't a crime scene. It's a kid playing outside." But Karen wasn't hearing a word. She kept shouting about rules, about violations, about how she worked too hard for this neighborhood to let someone like me destroy it. Then something changed. Her hand went into that enormous purse she always carried. For a second, I thought she was reaching for another citation, maybe a camera. But then I saw the glint. Metal, cold, unmistakable. A gun. Time slowed. My blood turned to ice. Emma whimpered. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" I stepped fully in front of Emma, arms raised, heart pounding so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. She raised the gun with trembling hands. "You don't get to ignore me. You think the rules don't apply? I run this place." My voice cracked from sheer disbelief. "Put the gun down." But in her eyes, I saw it. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about control, and she was willing to kill for it. I raised both hands, voice shaking but firm. "Karen, listen to me. You don't want to do this. Just put it down. Please." Behind me, I could hear Emma's soft, trembling voice. "Daddy? What's happening?" Every fiber in my body screamed to shield her, to grab her and run. But one wrong move could trigger something I couldn't undo. Karen's entire body was trembling now, her lips curling as she shouted, "You people don't respect anything. I'm the only one who cares." Her hands twitched, and then the gun went off. The explosion of sound shattered the peace like a bomb. It echoed down Maplewood Lane, bouncing off the houses, rattling windows and ripping through the quiet like a scream. I stumbled backward, a searing pain tearing through my left shoulder. It felt like being hit with a sledgehammer dipped in fire. But I didn't care. I turned immediately, eyes searching, and found Emma crumpled beside her overturned tricycle. "No!" I dropped to my knees, ignoring the burning in my own body. Emma was clutching her leg, crying out, blood darkening the fabric of her favorite purple dress. "Daddy, it hurts," she sobbed, voice small and panicked. "It hurts so much." I pressed my hands to her thigh, desperate to stop the bleeding, my fingers slick and shaking. Her skin was ghostly pale, her curls damp with sweat, her eyes wild with fear. "You're okay, baby. I've got you," I whispered over and over, though I was barely holding it together myself. My hands trembled. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. Karen stood frozen a few feet away, still holding the gun, eyes wide with what looked like disbelief, like she couldn't quite accept what she'd just done. I didn't mean to," she muttered. "She just wouldn't listen." And then she dropped the gun. It clattered on the pavement like a thunderclap. Chaos erupted around us. Neighbors came running. Someone was shouting for an ambulance. Others screamed. A man yelled into his phone, calling 911, voice shaking so badly I could barely understand him. I held Emma as tightly as I dared, whispering into her ear, "Stay with me. You're so brave, sweetheart. Just hang on." The sound of sirens began to build in the distance, and as the flashing lights painted our street red and blue, I realized our lives had changed forever, and nothing would ever be the same again. The paramedics arrived in what felt like both a second and a lifetime. Flashing lights painted the trees in urgent reds and blues. They moved quickly, professionally. No panic, no hesitation. One went straight to Emma, another to me. I barely noticed the pain in my shoulder anymore. All I could see was my daughter, pale and crying, whispering my name like a prayer she wasn't sure would be answered. "She's stable," one of them said, though I could hardly register it. "Gunshot wound to the thigh. Possible fracture? No sign of arterial damage. We're taking her in now." I nodded mutely. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, Emma's hand shot out, searching blindly. "Daddy, don't leave me!" "I'm right here, baby," I said, climbing into the ambulance with her, gripping her tiny fingers in mine. "I'm not going anywhere." The ride to the hospital was a blur, sirens wailing, EMTs shouting codes, machines beeping steadily. I never let go of her hand. At the hospital, we were separated. She was rushed to surgery. I was led to a trauma room where a nurse cleaned and stitched my shoulder. "You're lucky," she said. "It went straight through. Missed the bone." I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. I felt furious. The minutes crawled by. I called my wife, Sarah. She was out of state at a work conference. Her scream over the phone still rings in my ears. I wanted her there, needed her there, but there was no time. Emma needed both of us, and right now I had to be enough. 4 agonizing hours passed before the surgeon finally came out. He looked exhausted but calm. "She's going to be okay," he said. "The bullet fractured her femur, but we've set the bone with a plate and screws. There will be physical therapy, some scarring, but she'll recover." I had to sit down. Relief hit me so hard it knocked the breath from my lungs. When I finally saw her in recovery, she looked so small, dwarfed by tubes, machines, and bandages. Her eyes fluttered open, and when she saw me, they filled with tears. I was scared. "Daddy," she whispered. I took her hand, kissed her forehead. "I was too," I said. "But you're safe now, baby. I promise, you're safe." In the days that followed, our quiet neighborhood became unrecognizable. News vans lined the street. Reporters knocked on doors, shoving microphones into the faces of stunned residents. Headlines dubbed it the HOA shooting, and Karen Mitchell was front-page news, a suburban tyrant turned shooter. But behind the headlines, something deeper was unraveling. Emma remained in the hospital, groggy from pain meds and traumatized by everything that had happened. She flinched at sudden noises. She cried in her sleep. The bubbly, fearless little girl who once raced her tricycle in endless loops was now afraid to look out the window. Karen had been arrested, but not for long. Her lawyer, well-paid and well-connected, convinced a judge she wasn't a danger, just a pillar of the community who had snapped under pressure. She was released on bail after a single night in jail. An ankle monitor and a no-contact order were supposed to keep us safe. But the sight of her porch light turning on again filled me with rage. She had shot a 5-year-old child and gone home the next day. Meanwhile, Emma was learning to walk again, and I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her blood on the pavement. And then the stories started. Neighbors we barely knew knocked on our door, quiet and hesitant, like people emerging from hiding. They shared stories, some whispered, some angry, about Karen's years of threats and harassment. Mrs. Patterson said Karen had once threatened to have her home condemned over a chipped window frame. The Garcias, a third-generation Latino family, had endured her calling code enforcement on them monthly. One woman sobbed as she described how Karen tried to evict her for leaving her son's skateboard outside overnight. It was like a dam had broken. She'd ruled through fear and intimidation for years. The gunshot just made it undeniable, and in the middle of this chaos, our lawn became something else entirely. Flowers, balloons, teddy bears, cards from strangers and friends alike. It looked like a memorial, but Emma had survived. It wasn't grief people were expressing. It was outrage, solidarity, and a call for change. I couldn't take it anymore, watching Karen enjoy her life while my daughter learned how to walk again. The justice system was moving too slowly, and the neighborhood still felt like it belonged to her. That's when I decided to act. Quietly, I reached out to the neighbors who had come forward. We started meeting in my garage, lights off, voices low. It felt absurd, like some kind of resistance movement, but we were tired of being afraid, tired of silence. Mrs. Jenkins brought folders of old HOA fines Karen had slapped her with, dozens of them. all for things like planting unapproved flowers. Mr. Patel had documentation of Karen threatening to sue him over parking his work van in his own driveway. Sarah Chin, a single mother, played us a voicemail where Karen screamed threats about making her pay for disrespecting the rules. And then came the break we didn't expect, Karen's own brother, Harold. He showed up on my doorstep one night, pale and shaking. "I didn't know what she'd become," he said. "But after what she did to your little girl, I can't stay quiet." He handed me a flash drive. It contained everything. Karen's personal files from her computer, spreadsheets tracking every neighbor's infractions, photographs taken from hidden vantage points, even invoices showing she used HOA funds for personal landscaping, a new fence, and surveillance equipment. There were emails, too, bullying board members, threatening legal action, manipulating votes. It was more than evidence. It was a manifesto of control. We gathered it all, labeled, backed up, organized. Then we called for an emergency HOA meeting. She had no idea what was coming. The room was packed wall to wall. Neighbors who had never spoken at a meeting before now stood up, one by one, and told their stories. When my turn came, I looked Karen in the eye and said, "You shot my daughter over a tricycle. But before that, you terrorized every person in this room. Tonight, that ends." The vote to remove her as HOA president was unanimous, except for her own. But it wasn't just about removing her title. We weren't done. Not by a long shot. The night Karen was stripped of her HOA presidency was just the beginning. We had more than stories. We had hard evidence, financial records, emails, recordings, and photographs. And now we had momentum. Filed a civil lawsuit against her. Harassment. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Assault. Attempted murder. The file we handed over to our attorney was massive, ironclad, and damning. Then came the criminal trial. Karen's lawyer tried everything. He painted her as a misunderstood community volunteer who had simply cracked under pressure. He said the shooting was a tragic accident, that she had only meant to scare me, not hurt a child. But the jury didn't buy it. They heard the recording of her unhinged threats. They saw the pictures she'd taken of children playing. Evidence. She'd collected like a stalker, not a leader. They listened to neighbors describe years of intimidation. They looked at Emma's medical records. They heard her tiny voice on the 911 call crying out for me. It took the jury less than 2 hours to convict her on all counts: aggravated assault, child endangerment, reckless endangerment. The judge called her actions a complete betrayal of every principle of community and humanity. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8 years. Not enough to erase what happened, but it was something. And the civil suit? We won. The court awarded our family $2.3 million in damages. Karen had to sell her home, liquidate assets, and eventually file for bankruptcy. The same woman who once threatened to fine families for potted plants had lost everything. Her power, her property, her reputation, gone. What she'd built with. Threats and control had collapsed around her. And the best part? We hadn't needed to scream or riot. We'd simply exposed the truth. The legal system had finally done its job, and for the first time since the shooting, I could breathe. Karen was gone. Physically behind bars, yes, but more than that, stripped of the power she had hoarded and abused for years. Her absence transformed the neighborhood. Her house sat empty, a ghost on the block that once trembled under her rule. The silence from that porch, once the source of fear and fines, was a kind of music. But justice didn't mean instant healing. Emma's recovery was slow, painstaking. Her physical therapy sessions were filled with tears, frustration, and small victories that we clung to like miracles. Each step she took, each time she stood on her own, was a defiance of what had been done to her. Scars marked her skin. Yes, but They also marked her courage. Emotionally, she carried weight I wish I could take from her. She asked questions no child should ever have to. Why did she hate us? Will she come back? And worst of all, was it my fault? I held her close every time and told her the truth. None of this was her fault. She was strong, she was brave, she was loved. And the community didn't just support us, they transformed alongside us. We created a neighborhood watch, formed new HOA leadership, and rewrote the bylaws to ensure no one would ever again wield unchecked power. Transparency became our new normal. What happened on our street was unthinkable. But from that darkness came a surge of unity, empathy, and resilience I never thought possible. Karen may have broken a part of us, but she didn't win. She lit a fire she couldn't control, and in the end, that fire burned away everything she stood on, and from those ashes, we rebuilt. A year later, Maplewood Lane didn't look the same, but in the best possible way. The hedges weren't as perfectly trimmed. A few more toys littered the yards. There were chalk drawings on the sidewalks and laughter spilling from open windows. It felt real again, alive, imperfect, and finally free. Emma had come a long way. Her limp was barely noticeable now, and her smile, her real, radiant smile, had started to return. We marked small moments like milestones. Her first step without help, the first time she rode a scooter again, the first time she looked out the window without fear. On the anniversary of the shooting, our neighborhood came together, not in mourning but in purpose. We held a block party, one unlike anything Karen would have ever allowed. Tables stretched across the street. Music played from someone's old speakers. Kids darted between games and sprinklers. And in the center of it all, just off our driveway, stood a garden, a peace garden. It had been the idea of Mrs. Jenkins, who lost her husband 2 years ago and found hope in planting things. The whole neighborhood pitched in, pulling weeds, bringing soil, planting flowers, bright, messy, vibrant flowers. Emma helped plant daisies. Someone painted a wooden sign. From pain, we grow. I stood there watching her crouch near the blooms, her purple dress fluttering just slightly in the breeze. She laughed as a butterfly landed on her wrist, and in that moment, I felt the first true sense of peace in a year. Not the illusion we'd once lived in, a real peace, earned, scarred, and stitched together with the hands of people who had faced something monstrous and refused to let it win. That night, when the streetlights came on and the crowd thinned out, I sat on our porch with Emma curled beside me. We watched the stars come out just like we used to. She leaned her head against my arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "we're okay now, right?" I looked at her, stronger than she'd ever been, more beautiful than ever, and nodded. "Yeah, baby, we really are."